Hello, my podcast people, and thank you for joining me for yet another episode of my favorite online business podcast. If you are listening, watching, and tuning in on the day that it drops, it is Monday, June 1st. Goddamn, it's already June. In an effort to make this episode meta, and honestly, it's already meta because look how fast everything and how quickly everything is going. But in an effort to make this episode meta, we're going to hop right on into the main topic today, which is, wow, I need a haircut. And also the secret to brevity, right? The quote unquote secret to brevity. So today's episode inspired by the good homie, Sarah. She was in round one of my podcast program called Press Publish. We'll drop the link for round 4. Probably going to run that in the fall, but we'll drop the link for round 4. But she was in round 1, and I still talk to that crew. I still talk to all the crews, but I still talk to that crew probably the most. And she asked about how I'm able to keep these episodes so short. And it was a great question. And I was like, let me share this with you fine folks. So the number one reason, ready for this? The number one reason why these episodes are all shorter than 20 minutes is because that is how long my camera will record for before it needs to be reset. That is literally it. It is an externally imposed limitation. It is an externally imposed parameter. If you notice, before I started, maybe you probably don't even notice, but before I started doing video, some of the episodes would be longer. If I have a guest, obviously they're longer, but if it's just me, some of them would be longer. Now that I do video, I've been doing it for the past few years, they are all shorter than 20 minutes. Sometimes it'll go over, but it requires extra editing on my part, and so I was like, I don't want to do that. So perhaps you were feeling a little let down by that answer, but it is the truth, which reminds me of a story that I heard somewhere at some point in time. I'm pretty sure I read it on Instagram. But it was about a tradition that this woman had of cutting the ends off of a roast before putting it into the oven. She had been taught that tradition and that approach by her mom, and her mom said that she had been taught that by her grandmother, by her own mom. So that woman's grandmother. And that woman was just always under the impression that this was like, a specific thing. And she was like, when I have a daughter, I'm going to pass it. When I have a kid, I'm going to pass it on. Let's make it gender neutral. When I have a kid, I'm going to pass it on. And this is how we make these roasts. And at one point she was like, actually, let me ask grandma about that. So called up grandma. Let's make it even more fun. They were sitting around at dinner. And asked grandma, and she was like, why do we always cut the ends off of the roasts? And the grandma goes, oh, because when I first started making them, the oven that I had was too small, and it was the only way that it would fit inside. Right? I really like that story. And sometimes that's literally it, right? We want it to be this big thing, and it's just like, no, brevity and the outcome in this case was literally just as simple as externally imposed limitations on the task. And this is why I always taught folks to record Instagram stories inside of Instagram. Because when you record directly to your phone outside of Instagram, you have as long as you want. Right? It'll just record forever until your battery dies. Whereas when you're inside of Instagram and you're recording stories natively in the app, you have that little timer thing, right? And you can only record for 60 seconds, which is like typically actually more like 59 because it does cut you off. But like you see it going around and you're like, wow, this is it. All right. So plain and simple, the first strategy in order to execute my suggested strategy, in order to execute something with brevity, is simply externally imposed limitations. I know it's not sexy, but it's true. Second strategy is focus. And by focus, I don't mean just like trying really hard to focus and be like, I'm just going to make it shorter. I mean, getting specific about one thing, right? The one thing that you're going to be talking about, presenting, whatever you're going to be sharing, and not going off on any tangents. Right? If we're talking specifically about podcasts, this is why I write an outline. Right? Again, circling back to the camera situation, I didn't want to have to do the extra editing that's required in order to stitch multiple videos together. And so I wanted to make sure that I could get it all done within one take. Additionally, the stop and start, if I'm just recording audio only, it's not that big of a deal to stop and start and just splice them together. It is more work when you have a video. So I was like, I don't want to flub up and make mistakes and then have to go back and edit this stuff. So I'm going to make sure that I get it done in one shot, and also that I can get it done in under that 20-minute time cap. So I started making outlines. I didn't used to use outlines for the podcast episodes, but I was like, I got to stay on task. So I'm making an outline. I got to stay focused. I'm making an outline. All right. It also allows me to plan it out. So not only does it force me to stay on task while I'm actually delivering it, But when I'm planning it, I can make sure, am I focused on the one thing? Is this the one thing I'm going to be talking about? Did I deliver my point? Amazing. All right, I can just make sure that I'm talking about the thing that I need and want to be talking about, right? So the second strategy for delivering with brevity is focus. Third strategy, practice. Right? We all know how much easier it is to just like say or write more. And I'm not talking about like when we were younger and they were like, write a 10-page paper. And it was like, fuck you. No, I'm talking about like when it's just like, it is much easier, right? Which is why I'm making this episode, to just keep going and like say all the things. I'm like, okay, cool, it's done. Right? Brevity is very much a skill. Right? And that's a good thing because since it's a skill, that means that you can practice it, you can work on it, and you can get better at it. Right? Especially if you utilize the two previous strategies while practicing. Right? The two previous strategies being to have those, externally imposed limitations and focus. So we know it is tough. Brevity is tough. There's a famous quote. It's actually from Blaise Pascal, but often and incorrectly attributed to Mark Twain. And the quote is, "I would have written a shorter letter, but I did not have the time." It is like, I want just to just accept that it is more difficult to be brief. Right? But practice can help with this. Right? Also understand why practice helps is that the repetition that comes from practice, and especially when you're saying the same things over and over again, it inherently helps with that brevity because you learn that shit. You're like, yo, I know it now. I can deliver it really quickly. And you also, in that process, convince yourself of the truth of this statement, whatever it is you're talking about. Hopefully it's objectively true, but you hearing it so much, you're like, yeah, this is true. I can just boom, 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 rattle it off. And that also just allows for some of that brevity. Makes it easier, makes it faster, makes it shorter. The last strategy, so that strategy is practice. The fourth and final strategy is to lean into confidence. Now, this is more of like an after effect because I do believe that confidence is a byproduct of action, right? Confidence comes from doing the thing, but it is something that I want folks to be cognizant of and to actually take note of, because part of what prevents brevity are all the caveats we feel we have to throw out there and the need to justify and over-explain things, right? Which is not to be confused with nuance. When we need nuance, lean into that, please. We need more of it, honestly. In general, on social media, we need more of it, right? But sometimes we make a caption longer because we're preemptively trying to defend ourselves and get ahead of the trolls, which, again, does have a time and a place, right? I talk about 8 Miling things. Go see that one movie. Go watch that movie if you haven't, and you'll understand what I'm talking about with that, what I'm referencing. But sometimes the reason that we be writing more stuff and making this thing really long is because we're like, oh, I gotta explain it and justify it and make sure they understand it. So tying this back into that third strategy of practice, right, is do it. Make the thing shorter. Lean into brevity. Write less. Put that thing out into the world, whatever medium it is. Then realize that you didn't die, and then it's okay to say less, right? Believe the evidence that you have generated and use that to build your confidence. Right? Take it, store it, remember it, gain confidence from it, and then lean into doing it again, whenever next you want to lean into brevity, right? So worth noting with all of this, why are we leaning into brevity? Why do you want brevity? Sometimes things do need more words, and that's fine. It's not a bad thing. Use more words. The fucking patriarchy got women out here scared to say anything about anything. Immediately no. Say that shit with your whole chest and take up space. But if, in fact, it is that you want this thing to be shorter because you only have a certain amount of time to execute something, or whatever the reason, it's truly and genuinely yours, consider the 4 suggestions, the 4 strategies that I gave you. All right? Externally imposed limitations, focus, practice, and leaning into confidence. All right, look at that. Brief. That is all I have for today. Keeping it meta, leaning into brevity. All right. I will say, I'm going to use a few seconds here because I haven't done it in quite some time. If you're enjoying the show, one, thank you. But if you haven't done so already, I would love if you left a little rating or a review. Reviews are great because I can read them, but ratings are fun as well. So tappy tap, hit them stars. Would love it. I know you can do something on Spotify. I don't really know what that is. So I'm talking to the Apple users. If that's not you, well, that's fine too. Just I appreciate you being here. If you're watching, I appreciate that. All right. Gonna wrap it up there. Keeping it short, keeping it brief. As always, endlessly, one more time, endlessly appreciative for every single one of you. Until next time, friends, Maestro. Maybe I'll have a haircut as well. Out.